I'm joined by Tim Parkman, who is a Baptist minister in Tim. Tell us where you are.
Well, I'm down in Saltash in Cornwall, but I originally was born in Taunton and went to Holcombe Baptist Church from the age of 2 weeks old until I was in my 20s, where I went to Bristol Baptist College, which is where Rich and I met each other. There were good times and bad times at the college, Rich, but I won't say which one you were.
Nobody would believe you.
No, exactly. From there, I stayed in Bristol as an associate minister of Hallfield Baptist Church. Then about 7 years ago, I was called to come down to Saltash in Cornwall, which is a lovely part of the world, and I'm sure no one's jealous that I'm ministering in Cornwall.
No, we've never heard
So,
of it.
Rich, I know we're putting this on both our channels. Do you want to explain a little bit about who you are as well, for those that don't know?
Yeah, okay. My name is Richard Matcham, and I have recently become a grandfather of twins. My daughter gave birth just last week, and I'm yet to meet them. But anyway, I've been in Taunton Baptist Church now for just over a year. I had 5 months before lockdown, and the rest of it has been with the lockdown situation that we've all had to face. Previous to that, 9 years in Torquay as a Baptist pastor there. And prior to that, where Tim and I met at the Baptist College during our studies, and we've just remained friends, and we're having conversations about church, discipleship, mission, faith, hopefully even things like apologetics, Tim, and just discussions about some of the stuff that we're seeing or watching or listening to or even reading as well.
Yeah. I think, we've had chats before, and I think we've realised that actually, it's good to talk these things through, and maybe what we're doing now is just bringing other people into the conversation to kind of see their reflections. I know we've kind of talked a few things, Rich, but I think one of the areas that we've really hit on is at the moment in this particular pandemic, and maybe wider, what does it mean to belong? And I think that's a huge key for people at the moment, both in church life and in terms of just general belonging to Christ. And I know there's a slight difference between our two churches, Rich, isn't there? Well, so many differences, actually. We haven't gone back since March lockdown. We've not met, apart from the odd afternoon service that we did, but we've not met on a Sunday morning in person. And I know, Rich, we've talked, because actually I believe Taunton Baptist haven't they?
Yeah, we went back for September and October. Yeah. And after so many months of being away, that first Sunday back together, even though it had its mask-wearing, socially distanced congregation, of which the numbers were few, I think we probably had 50 or 60 people spread out. It was so good. It did me the world of good, and I kind of feel like from those 2 months I got a bit of mojo back, because we're not meant to be doing church like this.
No, and I think from our point of view, one of the issues for us, we have quite a smallish building, congregation of around about 100 to 130 potentially on a Sunday morning, but we could only actually fit 36 people back in the building. And I think the reason I'm sharing this is because actually there was a sense for many people, I don't think it was a fear of wanting to go back, but if we couldn't all go back and we couldn't all belong and be part of that for those who wanted to, and we couldn't celebrate going back, we kind of felt that actually now for us wasn't the time. But it still begs that question of, in this pandemic particularly, what does it mean to belong? And actually, I think it goes beyond the pandemic. I think we're starting to ask questions now that the pandemic have brought up, but that are vital of what does belonging to, in our context, a Baptist church actually look like. We've got membership, haven't we, Rich? But, just give me some of your thoughts on membership.
Yeah, I've been thinking about how the Baptist model of belonging through membership has its strengths and its weaknesses. On the one hand, it's very affirming. There are lines that are drawn that say, do you want to be part of this at this time, in this season of the church's life, with this group of people? Do you want to commit to it in covenant relationship, in participation? That's really good. But the model is an old model now, pre-Victorian probably, isn't it? And it is creaking at the joints in that there seems to be a sense that you become a member and you assimilate and a membership can become about something about not about participation and genuine discipleship and growing your faith as a Christian within a church community. I don't believe that you can grow effectively as an isolated lone sort of ranger Christian. I think that idea is clearly dysfunctional. But there is something about walking together with people that something about our model as it stands now needs to be reformed, renovated, renewed, something like that, or maybe even overhauled. I do like the idea of a covenant renewal, annual covenant renewal that is very deliberate in its language of belonging, of saying yes to this place and this people at this time. I personally think that's a potential way forward, but maybe we'll talk about that some more later, Tim.
Yeah, I think for me, I think there's I think I agree with you, and I think we've shared before, haven't we, that actually our current model of church meetings and membership and all those, developed through time and then got stuck at the Victorian ages, I think, as we've said before, that actually, there's a sense in which we haven't moved on from that. I remember speaking to someone in my church who's been a member at the church for 30 odd years, 40 years. And I said to him, how many times in that time have you been asked to reaffirm your membership promises? And sadly, I don't think it'll become as any surprise that the answer was zero. That actually, we haven't at any point tried to rectify that or do anything different. And I think that's important. Rich, I'll let you speak. Someone's at my door, but we'll carry on. But you just chat a little bit more. I'll be back in a second.
Okay. I got to do some more editing on this. Oh dear. I'm not going to say anything. See if we can guess who's at the door. His phone goes off. Had to start again. Someone knocked on the door. Oh dear. And that's why Tim is a brilliant person.
Rich, if you send me the video, I can edit it all. Don't worry about that.
You're going to want to listen to what I said.
Okay. So I think there's an element in which we've kind of got stuck in that Victorian age, and we, as you said, that idea of covenant renewal, which for those who've got any kind of Methodist roots will clearly resonate with. Because we make these promises and then all of a sudden there's times in which people just drift away from church, and that's never, we never formally say, oh, they've gone now or anything like that. And actually there's people in the church who I think every year we need to just reaffirm that we believe this is where God has called us. We believe we're in the right place. And I think that's so vital in this understanding of what it means to belong.
Yeah. It's very important, and I wonder whether it's because it's an in-out option. It's a binary option, two points, in or out, yes or no, and that does tie in to the kind of church discussions around once saved, always saved, who's in and out, who are the elect, where's the real church, the true church. I think, and those debates, those arguments are very much rooted in the centuries following the Reformation, especially. I think. It's a Protestant problem. We want to draw these lines very definitely, and even the Bible doesn't give us permission to do it quite like that. So I just wonder whether we need a lot more flexibility in what it means to belong, completely affirming of people made in the image of God, whom God loves, whom God has in Christ saved, and who has a salvation ready for them to claim. The work is already done. And that's the mission of the church, isn't it, to say yes. But these staging posts along the way of becoming Christian, or the degrees to which you are agnostic or atheist, or completely sold out to Christ, or lukewarm, or nominal, or whatever, that there are stepping stones along the way that a yes or no option doesn't quite allow for.
And I think, sorry to interrupt, Richard, but I think actually, we are going to be having to ask these questions in very different ways going forward as well. And I think one of the ways in which we've discussed before, and I know we probably have slightly different understanding of this, but the whole concept of online congregation. Yeah. I know I've put a scenario to you before, and I know you've basically chucked it back in my face and said it's too simplistic. But there's Doris who comes to church every Sunday, bless Doris, and sits at the back and doesn't engage in any other way. And then you've got Rita, who's online, who's never actually walked in the building, but is online and goes to all the online house groups and gives financially. And my question's who belongs? And I think what this pandemic has done is really started to ask some of those questions of who belongs, but in ways that we never anticipated. I mean, even 2 years ago, a year ago, Rich, when you first came to Taunton, if I was to say to you, actually, we'll be talking about who belongs, if people belong when they've never even walked into the church building itself, you would have scoffed at me, and I know you still scoff at me. But I think they are important questions in this whole sense of who belongs and how do we feel like we belong.
They are important questions, and they do raise other questions too, don't they? Because I do, although I completely understand, fresh expressions and church planting and house church models, and especially in the context of the way the early church developed, the church building must never own the people, but the building is still important, and I wouldn't give it a primary importance, but I would still want to ask some other questions around somebody, for example, who, like you say, has never been into the church building post pandemic. I would want to ask why, just simply why. What would be going on there to prevent that person from doing that? Because this is the location where the church gathers in this place, with its history and all its gifts and all its potential as well. I think something is lost when the incarnation of people gathering together is online. There's something gained as well, Tim. But
and that's the problem, is it? Because I think we're never going to come to a one size fits all, both in terms of individuals and both in terms of churches as well. I think the interesting thing for me is that we have, for years and years, as ministers and as people following Christ, talked about the church as the people and not the building. And it seems to me that the moment we've kind of had to live that out, it's caused so many problems for people, and let alone for us as ministers, in terms of asking these big questions of what does it mean to belong. I think, I'm intrigued by some of the online discussions that say, church for those who perhaps have disability has opened up in a way that it never has before. Church for those who have mental health issues has opened up for a way before. The time in which the church has seemed the most inaccessible for the majority of our congregation, it actually has become the most accessible for the wider community. And no, I hear what you say about the importance, and I started college a year before you, Rich, which is not to say that I got a year's head start on you. I bow to your knowledge. I had a different principal. Chris Ellis was the principal for that year that you weren't there, and Chris's big thing, and in both his doctorate that he wrote and his book that we use, is called Gathering, the idea of the gathered community. And I think I want to start not challenging that, because I really respect Chris, and I think I'd love to hear his thoughts on this. But that sense of, we've always thought of gathering as a physical thing. I wonder whether the challenge is now this idea of gathering actually has to be more than spiritual, or more than physical. Sorry, it has to be a spiritual sense of gathering in one in Christ. And is the location, I'm not going to say still important, because I want to hear what you said, but is the location as important as perhaps we've given it in years gone by?
Yeah, probably not as much as we've given it in years gone by. But there are strong biblical theologies of place, of land, of location, and and for some people in all the churches across this country, at least, if not everywhere, there's always some people in the church that have only known the town and that church that they're in, and that becomes a very special thing for them. I don't have that, because I've just moved so many times, and for all sorts of other reasons, I kind of feel like a bit of a nomad, really, in terms of place.
But you lived for quite a few years out of the country as well.
And out of the country as a missionary, yeah. So and that just adds to that, really. It kind of, but there's also a place for that too. If everybody was only ever located, that went to a church was located in the same place, had known nothing else, I'm not sure I would want to join that church, because it wouldn't have that variety of voices. It wouldn't have that kind of longer vision of outlook for ministry beyond the town and the locale that it's in. Maybe it would, I don't know. But I'm probably sounding a bit defensive now, because I'm not from anywhere really.
No, but I think I want to be heard that I'm not for 1 minute advocating that we should shut down every single church building and just go online. I think that although
Tim, some church buildings and the communities within them do need to be put out of their misery.
Yeah, no, completely. And I feel for particularly, I would say, our Anglican brothers and sisters, our Methodist brothers and sisters, who their model of church has usually, I'm thinking of friends locally here where you would talk of, one kind of largest church and lots of little village church. I mean, in Cornwall, we are littered, and I use that in a very nice way, but with small Methodist chapels out in the villages, which have a really strong family history, a congregation of no more than probably 10. And there's danger, and I'm not saying this is for all of them, but there's danger that sometimes actually the building, the location becomes so important that we're not hearing what God says.
No, I agree.
Sometimes actually we need to learn for churches to die well and not with their arms flailing in the air.
No, I agree with that, Tim.
But I'm not for one moment advocating that we should be closing I'm not saying for one moment that I want to close the building at Saltash and we're all going to go online. I think that's the worst thing we could do, because there's still an importance of, as you say, Rich, gathering, physical gathering. I am so longing for that day, and hopefully from the news that we're getting, it will be coming sooner, hopefully in the 2021, that we can actually get back together. I think for me, it's getting back together. It's being able to sing. It's been able to hug people appropriately. Putting my safeguarding hat on,
just in case someone was confused about
that. Yeah, and it's enjoying one another's company, and I think what we have to realise is that the churches that go back and just purely go back to the building and do nothing else, I think they are going to really struggle. I think we are going to need to have, going forward, an online presence, so that people who find, Rich, I hear what you're saying. I think there are people that, quite frankly, my worry is it's the excuse now, isn't it? You weren't at church, but I just tuned in.
I think also, Tim, I'm just kind of thinking 5-10 years down the line, where is this potential opportunity gonna take us?
Yeah.
And I think we're struggling with decades and decades of the church having we've talked about this too in the past, a conversion mentality to Christianity, rather than a conversion and discipleship. It's conversion and then assimilation into a church community, but not conversion followed by really robust discipleship. I don't think I've ever seen it modeled. And that includes my time in YWAM, where it's a discipling mission agency. And it was model. I mean, don't get me wrong, but I wonder whether we're paying the high price now for declining church culture, religion in general being marginalized. The Judeo-Christian tradition, has been described as a bunch of flowers with its roots cut now. The flowers are going to just start looking horrible soon. And that's the church. Of course, it's not an accurate picture, but you can't have a declining church culture in a secular society using the Judeo-Christian worldview, but dispensing with the God of the Judeo-Christian worldview. That doesn't seem to make sense to me. So I am worried about the long-term. I'm worried about the long-term health benefits for some people who, meeting together is sometimes also about iron sharpening iron. You don't get that on a screen in your own home. I do agree with you, Tim. There are benefits to be had for those that couldn't. But human nature, we know, is a bit of a slippery devil sometimes.
And I think you've just highlighted something there, though, Richard. There's a difference between won't and can't, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's a difference between those who won't come and those who can't. I think we always have to say that the the preference is that we meet in person together, but it's allowing space for those that can't. I think, we, like I said before, Rich, that this whole, it comes back to this belonging, is this whole sense of we haven't moved on from a Victorian understanding of how we do things. I think that's what's impacting us more and more now. We've not moved and we've not developed. And as you said, that understanding of, many churches, it's the battle that many churches face is the conversion. But actually, I think we're wise enough to know that actually the conversion is just the first step. When someone gives their life to Christ, I think in the past we've been wrong in going, yay, brilliant, and then almost discarding them off to one of the house groups.
Yeah, assimilation, I've called it. That's what it is.
Exactly. Yeah, but actually, we're now kind of in this sense of the sense of discipleship. And the danger is that we put programs in to meet those needs, where actually sometimes it's the one-to-one, it's the, like you say, the sharpening iron that's so desperately needed. And I think that comes back to this sense of belonging. If people, if people feel that they're being loved, cared, mentored, journeyed with, they've got someone in the church that they can do that with, that I think is going to be so important, because if we ever get back to a situation where we've got to come back online, it's much easier to build that relationship with one person that you've already got an existing relationship with and to carry that on, than it is to engage in an online congregation where people, but you don't journey with them necessarily in the way that you think you should be.
Yeah, no, I agree. There are those potentials, and I think we just have to have our eyes open to all the potentials. I've always been critical of the Billy Graham style conversion culture, and we have to own that. We have had a conversion culture, to the extent that as much as we will, and we've all done alpha courses, and we've done them ourselves, and we've probably led them with other people too, but it seems to be that we're perpetually on about alpha, forgetting that Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega. We never have this sense of developing a disciple. No, that's not even fair for me to say that. It's not fair for me to say that we never have that sense.
The emphasis has always been on that alpha moment, hasn't it?
Yes, as though that's the discipleship moment. And it's like the conversion. It's the beginning. It's not the end at all. It's the alpha. It's the beginning. Yeah. But I've been persuaded by a friend of mine who's a theologian in Wales, and he is a brilliant interpreter of culture, and he easily convinced me that every church community, whatever type of setup you have, whether you have big old buildings like we have at Taunton, or you're a house church or whatever, must be gift led, so that everybody's unique gifts that God has given can be used and can grow and can enable that person and the community to flourish. The moment the structure of the church starts dictating the terms and conditions of church community, which is what I think membership can do, it can put that squeeze on things. The moment you start saying to people, no, it's going to be like this, and that person is unable to use their gifts, what happens? They become stunted, frustrated, and probably end up leaving. So the church, it has to be always willing to be flexible, willing to adapt to whoever is coming into its life, so that unique person's gifts can be used for the flourishing of the whole church.
And I think, Rich, in a previous conversation that we've had, not recorded, we kind of had this a kind of light bulb moment, I think, didn't we, about baptism and the place of membership. We've so often aligned membership with baptism. The two go hand in hand. And baptism, we've talked about the once for all, and we do it one time and that's it. And but actually, I think with our chats, and you probably put this better than I did, we wanted to line it less with baptism and more with communion, didn't we?
So that bit again, Tim.
We wanted to align membership, not less with baptism, but the idea of how membership works more with communion, in that sense of, a repeated process, a remembering something that transcends both time and space.
Yeah, that's what that was, a light bulb moment for both of us. And so rather than have the one event that takes place like conversion or baptism, as supremely important as they are, we talked about tying belonging to the community, membership, however that's defined, through the lens of communion, which is arguably one of the, if not the high point of our church life together. Breaking bread together shapes that community, and we do that regularly for all sorts of reasons. It's not just the mere remembering, is it? But it's a participation in a past event in the present and for all time in the future. There's something profoundly all-encompassing about that, isn't there? That should definitely be some kind of focus for belonging, I think. Yeah,
but it's a wake-up call as well, isn't it? I mean, one of the things when I preside and lead over communion, and my church are probably fed up with me saying it, but it's a meal that transcends both time and space. Yes. We share this meal with heaven and earth, those who have been before and those who are to come. And if we could think of our belonging to the local church and whatever that looks like, because actually it's not just belonging to the local church, it's belonging to the universal church, but we express that through the local church. If we could see membership, or this, whatever we want to call it, in terms of a link between heaven and earth, of those who have been and those who are yet to come, the promises that we make almost a journey. I mean, in one sense, what we do in membership is we honor those that have led us individually to this point, as well as led the church, but also saying that actually we want to serve the church now so that future generations are able to find a place of sanctuary, worship, safety. And I wonder whether actually this whole historical journey we've been on with membership has just shrunk our idea of membership down to the fact that it's almost like belonging to a club.
It's become a bureaucratic procedure.
Well, it has, and I often say that what difference are we to the local golf club? You pay your monthly dues, and you get to do things, and you get to have a say in things.
You get to vote.
You get to vote, and I think we've reduced this idea of membership to.
I think the bureaucratic processes have overtaken the sacramental responsibilities of the church and the minister. That's why I love the phrase that came out of. I only learned this a couple of years ago, but Vatican II, when the Catholics met in the 60s, they came out with a phrase that described Mass as they call it, Eucharist, which they celebrate every day, don't they? And we tag it onto the end of a service once a month when we're not thinking about it properly.
It's only got to be either the first Sunday or the third Sunday.
First or the third. It's never the second Sunday. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work on the second or the fourth Sunday.
No, it's just the first or the third.
But, and I would be quite happy to argue the case for having communion every single week, because I'm convinced by what came out of Vatican II, that phrase, where they called the Eucharist the source and summit of the Christian life. I love that phrase. It's the gathered church gathering around the table, which is remembering the once for all sacrifice of Christ on the cross in his life, death, and resurrection. It is everything about what it means to be a human being.
Interestingly, I understand from my Anglican friends that actually their ministry is centered around the Eucharist. It's from the Eucharistic table that their mission, their ministry, and that's why in their tradition only those who are ordained can actually lead it. But I think that the danger has become that we've reduced that, haven't we, Rich? We've reduced the sacramental understanding, and it's just we better do this because God's asked us to do it. It's part of what we do. And woe betide us if we end up just going through the motions with.
I know. One of the things that I think has been fairly well received at Taunton in thinking about about the place of the communion itself, the table, the location of it, how it fits into a service, shaping a service around communion rather than having a service and then, oh, everyone's chickens are going to be cooked in their ovens now, we better rush through communion. But shaping the actual communion as the service, which is moving in the kind of the Anglo-Catholic tradition of centering the what is going on around the breaking of bread and the drinking of wine. I would even want to argue for having proper communion wine. I'm not a fan of the grape juice that Baptists love so much. I don't think the arguments about having recovering alcoholics in the church is anywhere near good enough, or even mixing it up like my church in Cardiff did in the 90s. The inner circle was grape juice if you didn't want to touch alcohol. The outer circle was communion wine. Yeah. There's all sorts of reasons why we do this, but I've never been able to quite have a conversation about that with anyone of any meaning, really, because we just do what we do because we've always done it like that. And
that's the problem. We let tradition dictate, don't we? The story I love about tradition is you do it once, it's brand new. You do it twice, it's a bit of a novelty, and then you do it 3 times and it becomes tradition. Yeah. And no one ever quite sure where that comes from. From my point of view, obviously from a good Baptist, being a good Baptist, Rich, the service, as our Baptist forebears would have had us, is centered around the word. The pinnacle of the service is
the pulpit is the center, not the table. Yeah. I get that.
Yeah. No, and actually at college, a great tutor, Sean Murray Williams, who I know you would remember, Sean, would always talk about communion being the sending meal. It's the meal we do at the end. It sends us.
Okay. Yeah.
But I do think sending is an important element of communion, but actually it's not the only element. And I think that sense of coming together around the table, I'd argue this because I think this fits into I don't know how long we've been going for, but anyway, but I think it fits into our sense of belonging. And this is, I don't know, I genuinely do not know your opinion on this. So I'm going to say this and then we can argue it.
Okay.
But it's a family meal.
Yeah.
And I am strongly welcoming of children if they believe that they can articulate. I remember once someone saying to me, but how can children understand? And I want to say to them, but how do you understand? Because this is something beyond anything we could ever understand. And actually, if we deprive children who, even in their basic understanding, say, I love Jesus, if we deprive them of this family meal, I think we start to go against this idea of even children belonging to the family of Christ. So there, I've said it, Rich. I don't know if you want to.
No, Tim, I'm in total agreement. This was one of the discussions that we had at my previous church, and it came out of all the adults that went out with the children, because you need, and because of safeguarding, thank God now we've sorted out our responsibility much tighter than it was before. So lots more adults ended up having to go out with the children. And if you just happen to fall on the day on a few months running, you could end up going half a year without actually having communion in church. So some of them came to me and said, can we have another communion service on the first Sunday rather than the third Sunday, earlier on in the service, so that we can include people. And that got us into a discussion about children partaking and what it means to be able to take communion. And I'm completely in agreement with you about children. We did have a really good discussion about this with many people. Most of the church were in agreement with it. 1 or 2 didn't, and that wasn't because they were being fussy or particular. It was just a thought through conclusion that you had to be a believing adult to take communion, not a child. But I just look at the language of the scriptures regarding children from the Old Testament right through the Gospels, and carrying on through the whole Bible. The language towards children is so radically inclusive and so incredibly protective of children. And clearly God's heart for children is just beating for them. Woe betide me if I stop them at the communion table and say, you don't get it, or you're not old enough, or you don't belong. Even one of the earliest frescoes of the catacombs in Rome has a picture of a family at communion. Children are being held by parents. They've always been present from the earliest times. Something happened in church history that said, no, children are out. This group of people are out. Those that haven't made haven't been to this many services, they're out. I guess, Tim, I mean, I would love to know your view on this. I do struggle with, sometimes, I get the idea behind it that you have to be a confessing, believing Christian to take communion, only in the sense that it could become a saving ordinance. So if you've heard the word read and preached and you've been part of the service, and that becomes the moment that you say yes to Christ, I wouldn't want to deny someone communion, but I would want to say, well, you know, if this goes on month after month after month, year after year, and you haven't made a profession of faith, you shouldn't be taking communion. But I want to allow for it to be a moment where someone can say yes to Christ and then take.
I think interestingly, Rich, this kind of perhaps even ties up our discussion or brings it towards an end, in that if we're talking about belonging, we perhaps as churches, as church leaders, as general people, need to step back a moment and go, if we can't welcome children, if we can't welcome both children in sense of children, but also baby Christians, children of faith, if we can't welcome those people, then we haven't got a hope in hell's chance of welcoming and helping other people feel belonging. Because
we find we have contradictions in our theology on this. My daughter had twins last week, Alfred and Evangelina. This Sunday, I'm speaking at the Churches Together thing on kingship and the gospel, the evangel, based on their names. Now, if our theology of being human is anywhere near biblical, we're going to say as pastors and preachers, these two, like me and like you, Tim, were loved by God from before the foundation of the world. Like you say, who the hell are we to say no to that?
I think that the danger is, and we've talked about this in this chapter, you know, that the rules and regulations kick in. You know, the whole, I'm not going to bring up this topic, but you know, we are both affirming of and believe that God has called men and women into ministry, but somewhere, and we read that biblically as well, that women, but somewhere in church history, something happened to change that. And I think something happened to change the sense of the abounding welcome that Christ offers. And yeah, you're right. You know, if someone's taking communion week after week and actually still haven't made a profession of faith, I think we've got to be careful of what that profession of faith is. I remember Holken, actually, a wonderful guy, Brian, who Brian lived at 6 acres, which I don't think is there anymore. And Brian was able at the age of 30 just to vocalize, God loved Brian, Brian loved God. Now, in that moment, what more could we ask for? Now, if we get our rule book out, it's probably not enough.
Yeah. No, it's not.
But actually, I think we need to be challenged that if we are to welcome and belong, or if we find a sense of belonging, we need to find ways of which we welcome everybody. And like you say, not put barriers up, saying you can't do this if you're this, you can't do that if you're not that. Yeah. There's a place in which people need to make a commitment to say, yes, this is the place that God has called me to, and these are the people. And at that point, you know, we then talk about church meetings and discerning the mind of Christ and listening, and we therefore have a shared responsibility that we've taken a commitment for. But actually, if we can, that's a whole different level to the level of helping people to belong in the infancy of their faith, or even in the infancy of their years. Yes. And if we can get that right, I think that maybe in years to come, that can roll on to kind of...
I love it, Tim. But because I'm immature, I would like to have the final word, because you've just reminded me that will completely round off, I think, what you're trying to say. When we lived in Torquay, we were doing respite fostering, as you know. And every third weekend, we would have this 11-year-old boy who's recently turned 14 now. He was 11 at the time, maybe 10 when he came to us. We'd have him Friday through Sunday evening, and he'd come to church, and he loved it. He just loved the people around him, all the other kids, and of course, because he was fostered, everyone made a special fuss of him. When we were having this discussion about communion at the church, I mentioned belonging in the call to communion or the liturgy or something, and my wife Rachel was sitting with this young boy, and he turned to her and said, "Don't forget, he's in foster care, and he's come out of a very, very bad situation." And he turned to Rachel and said, "Do I belong?" And Rachel said, "Yeah, you do." And he shared bread and wine with us. Of course you do. It was an incredible wake-up call. What are we supposed to say to that boy? Yeah, God loves you, but at this moment, no, you don't belong enough to have bread. It doesn't make it. There's some kind of cognitive dissonance going on with that kind of theology, I think.
Bless you, Rich. I think we better call it a day there.
Last word, yes.
If anyone watches this, we might do another one. I think we've got a series of 3 to do, but if no one watches it, we won't bother. So.
Well, Tim, it's just good to do it anyway. But I think they'll be flocking to this in their hundreds of thousands.
Brilliant. Bless you, Rich.
All right, mate. I'll see you soon. All right.
Yeah. God bless.